Welcome back. Now, 4 years after the deadly Galwan clash, which resulted in the face-off at the border and the friction between the two countries in the relations, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to meet in a short while from now on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. Now, this comes after the two countries reached a deal to end a military standoff at their disputed frontier. Agreement has been arrived on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in India-China border areas, leading to disengagement and a resolution of the issues that had arisen in the early times of the areas in 2020. Now, the agreement on patrolling arrangements is expected to lead to disengagement, de-escalation and demilitarization in areas where 50,000 to 60,000 troops are stationed on either side. Now, today's meeting is expected to focus on modalities for de-escalation and de-induction of troops by both sides to peacetime positions. Now, the two leaders last had a structured meeting during their second informal summit in Mamallapuram in October 2019, months before the start of the border standoff. My colleague Shreya Upadhyay is joining me from the newsroom right now. Well, Shreya, the larger question that is there in everybody's mind is that is India going to give China a brand new chance? Are we really expecting that the China is going to go back on its old ways? And how significant is this meeting going to be and how it will impact India's relations with China?
Samya, the answer to your question actually depends upon how China takes this forward, because remember, the two countries have already announced a border agreement. We are calling it agreement. China is calling it resolutions, and it is also saying in its statement that it urges India and it calls upon India to fully implement the resolutions. That difference in statement being put aside, we'll have to see how China really takes forward this entire LAC issue. The two countries have taken a step forward in terms of disengagement at the line of actual control. But of course, we'll have to see how China and President Xi Jinping move forward with it and whether we can fully trust China in the implementation of the agreement that has happened between the two countries. Apart from that, this crucial bilateral meeting, which we're expecting any time now, is extremely historic in terms of the fact that it is coming in after 5 years. Back in 2019 is when Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping had met in Chennai, as you mentioned. And after that, after the Galwan Valley clash in 2020, tensions have erupted. Tensions, in fact, have been continuing between India and China. This bilateral meeting really reflecting the fact that India and China want to move ahead, want to move forward, leaving behind the kind of border tensions that they have seen in the past 4 to 5 years. But we will really have to wait and watch as to how this meeting transpires and whether there's a joint statement made or what details trickle in of that crucial bilateral meeting, which, by the way, not just India and China is viewing, but the entire world has its eyes upon, because this is, remember, an extremely important relationship as well in terms of trade ties, in terms of the kind of border tussle that we have seen in the past 4 to 5 years. Trade ties were impacted, remember, Samya. Not entirely. China still remains the biggest trade partner of India, but there have been certain apprehensions in these last 5 years as to how trade ties between the two countries will move forward. So we'll really have to see what the two leaders say after that meeting, what happens, what transpires in that meeting. Apart from that, that border agreement that has been decided between the two countries, we'll have to really see what the two leaders talk in terms of the trade ties, in terms of how to take this relationship forward, considering that we've also seen, change geopolitical stances, change geopolitical order in the last few years amid the Russia-Ukraine as well as the Israel-Hamas war. Samya.
Absolutely, Shreya. Thank you for putting things into perspective for us. Let us also discuss this further with a panel of esteemed guests at this point in time who are joining me. Major General Sanjay Soy, who is a defense expert. I'm also joined by Colonel Dinny, who is a defense expert as well, and Prabhu Dayal, who's a former ambassador. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for taking our time and joining us. This is definitely a very, very important day as we are speaking, because India and China are finally coming on the talking table. What is expected, what is going to be on the agenda, we'll come to know in a short while from now when that meeting finally takes place. But my first question would go across to Colonel Dinny, the defense expert. Well, Mr. Dinny, you know, there's a lot that was expected. There has been a lot of hype surrounding India and China's meeting. Now, the fact that the disengagement took place right days before the BRICS summit was set to take off, what does it talk about the fact that both India and China are willing to take a step back and give these ties another chance?
Okay, ma'am, I think see the issue is that the decision for disengagement from those two friction points has been taken. The process, I believe, will start now. So there was troops in close proximity along the line of actual control in two of the remaining friction points, which were the Depsang Plains and the Demchok area. So there, a decision has been reached that there will be disengagement there, and that I think will be a work in progress. And after that is what the second part of the agreement, which is that patrolling will now resume, and it will be done in the manner it was done in the period of April 2020. Now, of course, there are certain still some clarity has to come. As of now, we know that there is an agreement, or whatever name you want to call that, has been reached between India and China for calming things down there. It's to bring the semblance of normalcy there. So certain steps have been taken, but as I understand, there is still a long way to go. I think this is first step is to complete disengagement process, and that process will be completed once we pull back the troops from Demchok and Depsang. I think subsequently we will see many more steps for de-escalation. And then, as you mentioned in your opening intro, that after that, the troops will have to go back, and that will be the process of de-induction. So I think this is a very, very, slow process. It has to be done with a lot of patience. It has to be done with a lot of verification on ground. So there is a process in place. I think a decision has been taken, and that is the biggest takeaway as of now.
Absolutely. Let me take that question across to the former ambassador, Prabhu Dayal, who's also joining us right now. Mr. Dayal, we've just heard what Mr. Dinny was saying, that a lot of clarity is still required to understand the disengagement process as and when it's going to be implemented. What does it finally going to entail? But having said that, a huge messaging across over there in Kazan, where the Prime Minister is going to be meeting Xi Jinping. What would it impact, like how would it impact India's positioning, especially vis-a-vis relations with China on a global platform?
Well, first of all, as regards the messaging, certainly this will ease the atmosphere and prepare for the Modi-Xi Jinping talks on the sidelines of the ongoing BRICS summit. Certainly the atmosphere will be improved, and our Prime Minister will be able to meet the Chinese president in a less tense atmosphere than would have been the case had this disengagement process not been announced. Now, Shreya, during her comments, was mentioning that while we are saying it's an agreement, the Chinese are mainly saying that the two sides have resolved to do that the Chinese are calling it a resolution. So there is a difference of perception. And really what happens in the next few days on the ground is important. You know, diplomats reach one kind of agreement, but it's the generals who see what transpires on the ground. And I think that it's the armed forces which will have to see what the Chinese are doing on the ground and give their opinion. But if things turn out well, maybe disengagement could lead to de-escalation, and de-escalation could, in course of time, lead to demilitarization, which would be very good. But since the Chinese have built up such defenses on their side of the line of actual control, it will not be possible for them to wind it all up. I don't think that they will wind up all these structures, dismantle them. So there will be a possibility for escalation anytime soon. I may also mention that the hopes always have been that China would seek a better normalized all-round relationship. We already have a lot of trade, but this will be stepped up further, that we can have ties which are beneficial to both sides. But the Chinese perception of the line of actual control is different from ours. And that is a big source of friction. And frankly, that friction can keep erupting. So it's a good sign that this sort of an understanding has been reached. We have called it an agreement. The Chinese are saying it's a resolution. But the atmospherics are better for the Xi Jinping Prime Minister Modi summit. And let's hope it leads to better things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for putting things into perspective over there, Mr. Dayal. Like you were mentioning, that there were several areas of concern, especially when it comes to the interpretation of the LAC itself in the minds of the Chinese people. Of course, it's going to lead to a lot of easing of tension, especially in the South Asia. Major General Sanjay Soy, you've heard what Mr. Dayal was saying. And to try and expect that China is going to turn a new leaf overnight, where they have decided to de-escalate and de-engage at the border front, there are certain questions that are still remaining in the minds of the people, especially of the opposition party that has put forth these 6 staple questions, where they're asking that if the soldiers are going to continue to be restricted to finger 3 in the Pangong Tso, when earlier they could go as far as finger 8, if the Indian troops will be able to patrol up to the claim line in Depsang, and also the fact that if they're going to be allowed to patrol beyond the permitted access to the 3 patrolling points in the Gogra hot spring area that could earlier go up to. Now, these are legitimate questions that are there in the minds. When you're talking about the disengagement at the border front, will the status quo, especially when it comes to March 2020, is going to be restored or not? Mr. Soy, do you think that there is a long way to go, especially when it comes to China walking the talk?
Absolutely, Sanyaji. Thanks a lot for the invite. And in fact, I would agree with both my earlier speakers, Mr. Dayal and Colonel Dini. In fact, it's when we talk of the armed forces, I mean, on the one side, at diplomatic level, they've agreed, okay, we'll go back to the stage, patrolling will start and we'll start the disengagement process. But if you go through the statement of Army Chief, which brings out that initially the trust need to be built up. Since 2020, the lot of trust has totally broken. Number of incidents had taken place, and before that, things were different. So that trust has to come up because there's a lot of buffer zone or no man land, which we call it, because of the different perception of line of control. So for the man on ground, it is very, very difficult then to which line he must guard. I mean, when we talk of a soldier, we have to tell that Havaldar so-and-so or Subedar so-and-so, that post commander, that you are to guard from this rock, left corner of this rock, to this stream, to this bridge, to this mountain peak. That is the line of your responsibility. If the Chinese think differently, then that is what causes the friction. So at present, the fact is that they have both agreed to go back to the pre-2020 situation, which was our demand right from after the Galwan. We have been saying that unless we go back to the 2020, we cannot have further talks, further discussion on this. So their peace has to be there on the border. So this is one step. After this, the next step would be the trust has to be built up so that there is no creeping into the no man's land. The patrolling, watching the patrols is very, very important. What is the route we are following? Then only the trust will build up. Then the next stage will be disengagement, then the de-escalation, and the normal management of LAC like grazing and normal life would start. So it will, yes, Sami, you are absolutely right. It will take some time. It is not going to be overnight. But the good thing is that positive beginning has been made. The positive thoughts have come in. I'm sure because probably both the countries realize, especially the China realizes that it is good for both of us if we remain peaceful, if the border remains peaceful, because both are most populous countries, both are a growing economy. China is second, India is fifth largest economy in the world. And if we join hands together, it is win-win situation for both. I feel it is a win-win situation because at present also, India is the largest trade partner with China. I mean, we are with largest trade partner, $118 billion worth of trade is likely to take place this year. Last year it was around $114 billion. So, and it can go up many notches. Both the countries can benefit a lot. Probably that is what China has realized. Because if you see off late, China realized that a lot of foreign investors had moved away. They eased out their stock rules and regulations. A lot of investors are moving towards China. So they are now thinking of how to ramp up their economy again, which was in bad shape after COVID, especially because sanctions, because of continued problem in South China Sea. That is where probably they realize that, okay, let's secure one front and handle the other front. Let's have friends with India and let's handle the other front, Samya.
Absolutely. Thank you for putting things into perspective, Mr. Soy. But Mr. Dayal, you've just heard what Mr. Soy was saying, that both India and China are fast-growing economies. They are populous countries. And of course, it might benefit to try and come on the talking table and ease out the tension between the two nations. But can we forget what happened in Galwan? Of course, we cannot. But can we also forget the fact that China is our neighboring country and we share a border with them? And the conflict will rage from time to time because we can't really rule that out in the near future. The fact that India is faced with Pakistan on one side and China on the other side, do you think India will have to revisit its strategy vis-a-vis China, especially when it comes to border strategies and trade strategies?
Well, our strategies are always kept under review. No strategy is fixed and permanent. We reshape strategy according to inputs and requirements. Now, we had been consistently saying that with China, we cannot have a normalized relationship where trade flows, people-to-people contacts are possible, airlines operate. These things are not possible until the situation at the border de-escalates. And there is disengagement at the flashpoints. Now, disengagement had taken place at 3 of the flashpoints, the Gogra Hot Springs, the Pangong Lake, and the Galwan Valley. But it remained to be done at Dipsang and Demchok. And these were flashpoints. These were issues that were holding up further normalization and the possibility to move toward better relations. Now, if this disengagement takes place at these 2 flashpoints, then certainly there are hopes, as you have mentioned, for moving towards a better relationship. So it remains to be seen how the Chinese behave in the future, because there is a trust deficit between India and China. Let's face it, we have seen the Chinese backtrack on so many issues. We have found that their interpretation of the LAC is very different from ours. So the possibility always remains alive of fresh outbreaks, which would damper sort of any movement towards normalized relations. But I do agree with you, as things stand, this is a positive movement, and it certainly has cleared the atmosphere for the summit that it will be held today.
Absolutely. Well, we are waiting to see what comes out of that bilateral that is set to take place in a short while from now. But Colonel Dinny also continues to be with us. Mr. Dinny, you've heard what Mr. Prabhu Dayal had to say and Mr. Soy had to say. And by and large, what we're talking about is that to what extent is there going to be a disengagement at the border? Well, that fine line hasn't really been elaborated upon from the Chinese side as yet. Of course, like I was asking, there are questions being asked about certain areas of concern, whether at all the patrolling is going to be allowed to a great extent or not. Will they be able to retain their status quo or not? But how is it going to impact the morale of those soldiers at the border, especially those who were there perhaps when the memory is fresh in the minds of all the soldiers when the Galwan Valley clash had happened? How is India-China's talk going to impact the morale of those soldiers at the border?
Ma'am, first of all, I think 2020 and post Galwan, this a lot of time has passed. I don't think any of the troops of that particular operation would be still deployed there. They would have probably would have been changed over. The next new set of troops would have come by now. But as far as the morale of the troops is concerned, Indian armed forces and particularly the Indian Army from where I and General Sohi served. For us, it doesn't matter whether there is an agreement on the between leaders or there is disagreement between leaders. For them, what matters is the task which is given to them, and that is at the absolutely at the ground level. They say the last 100 meters of the border is decides the even the highest level of diplomacy. So whatever happens at the last 100 meters, it depends upon what task is given to the Jawan or the soldier or whosoever a set of officers who are there. So it does not make much of an impact because their morale, their training, the cohesion of the unit all comes into play. So it doesn't matter much. However, what matters is, the situation, like Mr. Prabhu there also was mentioning, that there are areas where there is areas of differing perceptions. Each whether it is the PLA or the Indian Army perceives that the LAC is in a different manner, and that is where the trigger point for this particular incident also, April 2020, also started from there. So as and when the patrolling starts, I believe that there are some agreements which has been reached that there will be once a week, or the prior information would be given and timing would be told, and there will be no overlapping and all such things are good. But in the area of this differing perception, which presently is earmarked as buffer zone, if the troops come face to face, that is the time where a lot of maturity and a lot of I would say transparency need to be there so that things don't go out of hand as has had happened in the past. So that is all a matter of concern. If there is an agreement on that also, I believe that this particular disengagement and subsequently de-escalation and all would lead to at least some sort of stability in the near future. But if the troops come in close contact frequently, then probably another flare up. We cannot rule out because troops in close contact, they derive their own logic, as the saying goes. So it is very difficult then to, we can't actually predict how they will behave. So my point is the agreements are good. It is very important for the peace and tranquility along the LAC. The patrolling has to be restarted. And also, I'm very sure also there is the in between the question which you asked, that whether we will be able to reach our patrolling points. I don't think any of the army or the diplomat who had negotiated from the Indian side, they would leave any stone unturned to ensure that wherever we used to go, we can continue to go there. I don't think anybody of us would agree that earlier we used to go, now you can't go there. For example, if the Chinese were coming up till finger 4, then we will go up till finger 8. But if they are not coming up till finger 4, then naturally we will also not go up to finger 8. That is the kind of arrangement, or that is the kind of agreement which will be worked on. So these details are yet to come. But overall, as I mentioned in the starting, that this kind of thing does not affect the morale of the troops. The morale and the rest of the things is handled at the tactical level, and for them the task at hand is all what is required and how best it can be done.
Absolutely, Mr. Dini. And when I meant that there are going to be soldiers over there who've got their, the entire episode of Galwan fresh in their minds, I only meant that as contemporaries are concerned. But of course, Mr. Dayal, we've heard what Mr. Dini was also saying. When we talk about the trade ties, especially between India and China, we saw how India had reacted to the Galwan clash in 2020. They decided to do away with several of the Chinese apps, and certain embargo was put on the construction and the trade between the two countries as well. Do you think that India is looking at, renewing those ties again? Because the world is also looking towards how India and China is perhaps going to come on the talking table and mend the strained ties.
Well, you're right in recalling that after the Galwan clashes, Chinese companies had been struggling to do business in India because our government had tightened norms. For instance, we had banned around 300 popular Chinese apps like TikTok. Now, a good relationship with India certainly helps the Chinese, and it will help us too. Well, it is no secret that China has been one of our top trading partners and a key supplier of several items like telecom hardware and materials which are needed for our pharmaceutical industry. So we both need each other. But as we have been saying all along, unless the disengagement at the borders take place, there is no possibility of an improved all-round relationship. And now, following this agreement, if our armed forces report back to government that yes, disengagement has taken place, then we can hope for the next step, some de-escalation. Of course, demilitarization would be very difficult because the Chinese have built up so many fortresses and have set up such formidable defenses on their side that there is a certain threatening aspect to it all. So we will have to be prepared for war if we want peace. But as things stand, this recent announcement by the two sides helps to create a better atmosphere for the summit meeting today, and hopefully will lead to a better all-round relationship.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'll have to wrap this conversation. I thank our esteemed panel of guests to take out time and join us this evening. Major General Sanjay Soy, Colonel Dinny, and also Prabhu Dayal sir. Thank you so much for joining us here at Mirror Now.
Thank you.